This plant here, although it's pretty much done for the year, it's losing its color. But still, this is a plant I'd like to show you. It's one of our northwestern plants that I like so much. It's called Adenocaulon bicolor. Adenocaulon bicolor, otherwise known as Pathfinder. And although we don't use it for medicine or for food, if you look at the bottom of the leaf, it's bright white, whitish. It's got a hair underneath it that stays so close to the surface that it almost doesn't look like hair. It looks like a different color. It totally obscures the color of the leaf, but it has this nice white color. And the thing about the Pathfinder, in some areas, the forest floor is full of Pathfinder. And as you walk by it, you turn the leaves over just by walking past it. And then if you get lost, you can actually find your way back by following the path of the Pathfinder. That's right, this plant here. This one here, another parsley family plant. It's not really also visible right now. It seems to just be a dead stem. But actually it still is identifiable because of the fruits. The fruits, these are called schizocarps in the parsley family. That's how you tell parsley family plants. The carrot family, the umbelliferae or Apiaceae, is 100% identifiable when they're in fruit. There's many plants in this family. You have Osha, ligusticum. You have Angelica. There's many plants in this family that are good medicine. There's also good food. There's yampa, there's parsley, carrots, parsnips. But 100% identification is easy by the fruit and sometimes difficult by leaf and other characteristics. In this family is also poison hemlock and water hemlock, two of the most toxic plants in North America. This particular one is called sweet cicely, or Osmorhiza chilensis. This is the plant that led me to go to Chile. Because, you know, a number of years back, I thought maybe I could go to the rainforest in Central America and use my work as a botanist, use my knowledge to be able to do something. And I realized, well, I don't really know much about the plants in the tropics. And I could learn, but then I realized, well, here's this plant, Osmorhiza chilensis, grows in the Northwest and in Chile. And there was a bunch of plants that grew in the Northwest and then also in Chile. So that's why I originally went down to Chile, was because I realized that there's a lot of plants that grow in both places. One thing about this plant, this particular one, the fruits, when they're green, are quite aromatic and make a wonderful spice or pleasure tea or something for upset stomachs. But the root is a solid edible. It's like a carrot. And on this plant walk, if we had more time, maybe we could gather some of these roots and dry them and pound them into a powder and maybe mix them with some blackberries and some rose hips and add a little bit of water, maybe some salmon, mash them together, dry them up, and make some cakes that we could eat. But unfortunately, we don't have time today. Instead, I'll just think about it for lunchtime. One of my favorite plants, one of the plants that I talk about quite a bit, is Oregon grape. Berberis or Mahonia. This particular one is aquifolium. It's actually the state flower of Oregon. And so here we have it, here. And the way you can tell Oregon grape is it has spines on the edges of the leaves. Or you could say they're spinulose margined for the botanically inclined. This is a plant here. Maybe not the best example, but it's the time of year where it looks like this. One of the things about Oregon grape is that these are not actually leaves. These are called leaflets. But to anyone else, it would be called a leaf. Notice how all the leaves are arranged in one plane. In other words, they're flat. They're all in one plane like this. all in one plane. If you were actually looking at this botanically, you would say that the leaf starts here where it meets the stem, and that this whole thing here is one leaf. This is Oregon grape, Mahonia aquifolium or Berberis aquifolium. This is one of those plants that I could probably talk for the whole 2 hours just upon Oregon grape. But I'll give you a little bit about it today. I consider Oregon grape probably one of my most used plants here in Oregon, probably one of the most valuable plants for me. It's very common, and so it's a plant that we have around us that we can use. It's a bitter, meaning that when you taste its root, it has a very strong bitter flavor. This bitter flavor causes a reflex action. Just the flavor of bitter, a few drops of tincture on your mouth, or the taste of a dandelion leaf, or any flavor of bitter, including the Oregon grape root. The flavor of the bitter causes a reflex action. You can't control it. It's like getting your knee hit at just the right spot and getting your foot to shoot out forward. It causes a reflex action down your GI tract. It causes your hydrochloric acid to squirt. It causes enzymes for digestion of protein in your stomach to start being produced. It primes the pump, saying food's on the way. It'll actually, if something is in your large intestine, your small intestine, your stomach, it'll actually start things moving down to the next level. So essentially what it does is prime the pump and aid in a deficient digestion. So bitters are extremely helpful because people here in the United States have a difficult time with digesting food. In my clinic, it's very rare for someone to actually show up and say, oh, my GI tract's fine, don't worry about that. No, that's not the case. Once in a blue moon does someone actually come that way. Most of the times people say there's at least something wrong with their digestion. So these bitters are very good for bad food combinations. They're very good for food that hasn't been cooked enough, beans that haven't been cooked enough that give you the farts or flatulence. Bitters are good for many things that happen. Bad food combinations, oily slicks in the toilet bowl, bad digestion of oil. You're looking at bitters. Bitters really help that. It helps coordinate the squirts of the gallbladder and the alkaline juice that goes into your small intestine that's needed for the digestion of oils and fats. So we look at bitters or Oregon grape as a digestive aid, and that's really interesting. I know when I spent my time down in Arizona in the month of February for 7 years and hung out with Michael Moore, he would laugh at the thought of using Oregon grape as a bitter because there's bitters everywhere, just like there's astringents everywhere. And he would have to drive thousands of miles to come get Oregon grape, and he would use it for its other reasons. He would never consider using it as a bitter unless that's what he had, because there's so much around where he grew. So wherever you're seeing this and wherever you live, you don't have to go and get Oregon grapefruit for a bitter. There's bitters wherever. But it does other things besides being bitter. One of the things I think are very interesting about it is that it seems to be useful for as a general alternative for colds and flus. When you start to get cold, when you have a cold or a flu, I'll often take Oregon grape to help move through those colds. It also seems to work for a variety of infections. I found it useful in all types of infections that I've worked with, or most infections, whether they're external infections, cuts and scrapes that begin to get infected. Making a salve of the root, it seems to help. I've seen it work with sinus infections, with bronchial infections, with reproductive infections. I use it internally much like an antibiotic. Now, I think this is really interesting. I know that people like to look at plants and look for the main ingredients of the plants. What are the main ingredients? What's this one chemical? And in Oregon grape, people would say, oh, it's the berberine. It's the bright yellow-orange color. It's in the root. You can take the root, which is not actually a root. if you're botanically inclined, you would say it's a rhizome, an underground stem. But for those that aren't botanically inclined, it's the underground part that looks like a root. And it's woody, and if you peel this wood off, you can see this bright yellow color under the bark. That's the berberine. And many people would say that this main ingredient, berberine, is how you gauge your Oregon grape strength. It's the main ingredient. I've been around long enough with herbalism to realize that whatever the main ingredient is, it's going to change. Very interesting, very true. Science changes. Medical knowledge changes, actually quite quickly. And so whatever the main ingredient is, it can change. In my life, I've seen main ingredients change 2 or 3 times for the same herb, even well-studied herbs. So I had been using Oregon grape for many years, since the early 80s. And I used it for a variety of things. I used it for skin conditions, for example. And at one point, one of the major herb companies decided to switch out from golden seal to Oregon grape because I pushed Oregon grape so much. It was back in the late 80s or early 90s, I think this happened. And they switched their salves, their oils, over to Oregon grapefruit instead of golden seal. And then I got this phone call that said, well, you know, there's not a lot of berberine in the oil. We had it tested, and it seems like it doesn't come into the oil very well. They were concerned, and I kind of felt like, well, don't worry about it. I've used this and it works. So whether or not the berberine transfers well into the oil, it still works. And that was kind of a leap of faith here, because berberine is supposedly the main ingredient. I think it's really interesting. As time went on, I stuck with what I saw it doing. I stuck with this is effective for these types of infections. I saw some research, easily found. I believe you can find it in Mills and Bones' Principles of Phytotherapy, or some other books like that, about berberine sulfate, or perhaps it was berberine hydrochloride, dropped in petri dishes for different types of bacteria. And it showed that it worked against E. coli. It showed that it killed strep. It showed that it killed all these different kinds of bacteria. And I got really excited. I was like, wow, look at this. It finally shows that scientific proof that Oregon grape is effective against these things. And then I started using this information as kind of like proof. And Paul Bergner came to me, who at the time was the North American Institute of Medical Herbalism. He does Medical Herbalism magazine. He did the Rocky Mountain School for many years. And Paul Bergner said to me, well, you can't use this information, Howie. Look closely. It's not Oregon grape in a human. It's berberine hydrochloride or whatever in a petri dish. And if you see the amount of berberine that it takes to kill these bacteria, if you had that same amount of berberine in your blood, it would cause you to die. It would kill you. So this is actually showing you that it isn't the berberine that's killing this infection. Now, this is essentially saying berberine doesn't work Oregon grape doesn't work this way in your body. And so I stopped using it. It's very interesting because if a chemical company, a pharmaceutical company, were to use this type of information to back up the chemicals or the drugs that they're using, people would look at it and go, oh, you can't use this information. It doesn't really relate to effectiveness. It's petri dish work. It's not human clinical trials. And so we have to be careful as people in an alternative community using this type of information that doesn't really reflect what we might believe. But years went by, further research was done, and some interesting things were found out about Oregon grape. It was found out that it had another chemical in it that had some value. What we're looking at here has to do with the actual bacteria itself. In the wall of the bacteria, is a pump. And when antibiotics or poisonous substances get into the bacteria, there's this little pump that pumps the antibiotic out. And so it doesn't hurt the bacteria. This is a little pump. It's called a P-glycoprotein, or an MDR pump. I have a tendency to envision it much like a little gerbil inside a little wheel that spins around, that causes things to spin. It pumps out the antibiotic. Whatever metaphor you want to use that works is good for me. So we have these pumps inside the bacteria that pump out poisonous substances. There's a chemical in Oregon grape that breaks this pump. So what we're looking at here is berberine in low levels that's so low that it may not kill the bacteria, but together with this other chemical that breaks the pump so the berberine can't get pumped out, suddenly you find that Oregon grape can kill bacteria that berberine alone can't. This proves a couple points. One is that it's not usually one main ingredient. It's often a synergy of a number of main ingredients. This is very common in plants. In fact, some plants, there is no one main ingredient that you can take out that will replicate the effect of the whole plant. So here we have this is very interesting. And another point I like to make is at this point I've stopped saying active constituent or major constituent and started using the term chemical marker, which is a really good way to do it, because now we're looking at, you can gauge that this actually is Oregon grape by seeing if there's berberine in it, by seeing if there's certain chemicals in it, rather than saying that these chemicals are responsible for its main active effects. Something that I find extremely interesting about what I'm saying, to take this one step further, that right now, with the research done into Oregon grape and how it works, there is now current research in manufacturing drugs that work in this same way. There's a whole new set of drugs coming out here in the next few years. Who knows how long it will be? It might be many years, but they're working on it right now. What you're looking at is a pump inhibitor from Oregon grape together with a synthetic berberine-like compound attached to it. And the other types of drugs similar would be a synthetic pump inhibitor with berberine attached to it. So we're looking at a new form of drugs. As our antibiotics are becoming ineffective against antibiotic-resistant bacteria, we're seeing a new set of drugs being developed that mimic Oregon grape's effect, that have the pump inhibitor together with an antibacterial agent. And I think that this is tremendous to me, to see how we're using the way plants function on the human body and learning how they work, and then being able to use this type of information to help people in many ways. Another thing to consider is that research has shown now, there's actual research showing that Oregon grape mixed with antibiotics, I believe it's Oregon grape and Cipro that's been tested, and I'm not sure, I believe it was a couple other antibiotics have been shown to be more effective when taken with Oregon grape. So you can take this one step further to say that if you are taking antibiotics and you've gone through the first couple sets and it seems like nothing is taking effect and nothing is working, and you have some antibiotic resistant type of bacteria, it may be of value to consider taking Oregon grape at the same time to see if it will help increase its effectiveness. I hope to see more of this in the future, because it's one of our major problems right now with antibiotic-resistant infections. Okay, I know that hill was kind of large. Take a moment, have a drink of water, catch your breath. I have another plant to show you here while you're resting up. This one here, which looks so much like Oregon grape because it also has spinulose margins, or spines on the edge of the leaves. This is our poison oak lookalike, holly. Notice that the leaves are not all in one plane, that they come out at different angles from the stem. Very different than the Oregon grape. At first glance, it would appear to be Oregon grape, but if you look closer, you see that the leaves are arranged differently. There's other things about it. There's the bark. If you cut the bark and look at the wood, there's no yellow. If you look at the fruits, they're very different. The Oregon grape fruits are bluish, blackish, and the holly fruits are bright red. This is holly. This plant is totally unrelated to Oregon grape, medicinally or taxonomically, botanically that would be. And it's actually poison. It's something we don't want to be eating. It's also a weed in our area. I know some places it grows naturally, and in some places it's grown for its ornamental value during Christmas time and used as a beautiful plant. And what's happened is it's escaped from many of the holly farms here and gone into the woods, where it's actually an invasive weed. So I'm not particularly fond of holly in our native environment because it has a tendency to outcompete other plants. Here it is here, botanically related to mate, believe it or not. People like mate, though it has no caffeine. Here in the Northwest, we have a lot of this lichen that's coming off of this tree here. This is old man's beard, or Usnea lichen, Usnea. It's got the beautiful green color. Usnic acid is responsible for the beautiful green color. It's growing off of the trees. I think what's really interesting is that this plant is not a parasite. It doesn't actually connect with the tree and take some of its energy. It isn't a chi sucker like most parasites are. It doesn't suck the chi out of the tree. It just hangs on the tree and gets its energy from the sunlight and the water and not from the tree itself. It is attached to the tree, but it's just anchored into it for to hold on to it, to be up there on the tree. I generally don't take lichen from trees if I can help it. If you just look below the tree, you'll see down here there's all these fallen branches full of lichen. What I think is very interesting is that many people will glance at this type of long lichen and just assume it's Usnea. There's actually quite a few plants of quite a few lichens that look just like this. So if you're looking for Usnea, what you want to look for, take the plant and pull it apart. And you can see it here in my fingers. There's an inner cord. There's an inner cord when you pull it apart that holds it together. You can take the lichen, you can pull it apart, and you can see that inner cord. That's how you know it's Usnea. Now, not all Usneas have this inner cord, but if it has an inner cord, it's Usnea. The other ones that look like it also have usnic acid in it and could probably be used the same way. And that's probably a good thing, because I think that there have been many wildcrafters who will go ahead and take a huge clump of Usnea and look through it and say, oh, this is Usnea, and then just assume it all is, when I've seen a lot of clumps that are mixed together and are difficult to separate out. You actually would have to test each little piece to make sure that's what it is. People use Usnea medicinally as for its antibiotic-like properties for colds and flus and lung issues. I do have to think about the Usnea for a while because it's a lichen. And lichens are not the same as plants. They're very different. Lichens are actually a fungus and an algae living together as one organism. It's not one thing. It's two things living together. You're looking at an algae that would normally shrivel up and die just hanging on a tree because it's not wet enough, and it's covered with a fungus that protects it. And together they live off each other and they survive. Some of the lichens around here have 3 different organisms living together. And a plant like Usnea is very slow growing, and there are fronds of Usnea that could be older than us. Well, could be older than us. So I try to put myself in the position of trying to understand what it would feel like to be an Usnea, and it's much more difficult than trying to understand what it would feel like to be an animal or a plant. This is much farther away from me than other things around me. So the Usnea is also very old, and I think this is another interesting point about putting things in our body that are old. I recently was harvesting some angelica and noticing its age. at 20 years, 30 years, 40-year-old Angelica genuflexa. And someone mentioned to me that most of the food we eat nowadays is not that old. Most of the food we eat is 3 months old or a year old or a few years old. And that it's unusual for us as humans now to eat things that are 40 or 50 years old, whereas a few generations back, we were regularly doing that. I don't know how that affects our health, but it's definitely something I have been thinking about lately. So when it comes to Usnea, I know that you'll hear some concerns about how to make a tincture, how to make an extract that's of value. That there's things in the Usnea that don't come out very easily in water or in alcohol. There's certain ingredients. And in a lab or with some equipment, maybe you could do some work to get better extracts. But if you're making this at home, how can I make an Usnea extract that I might find of value? And the way I like to do it is a double extraction. I'd like to describe this to you. What I would do is make a tincture from the Usnea like I'd make any other tincture using pure grain alcohol. So you take the Usnea, you make sure it's Usnea, you chop it up, you put it in the jar, and you put alcohol in it. And you let it sit for 4 weeks. Okay, this is pure grain. And you'll get a lot of the alcohol-soluble constituents going into the alcohol, but you won't get much of the water-soluble constituents. That'll mainly stay into the plant. So when you're done, you squeeze the tincture out. You pour off the alcohol and you squish on the herb. It'll probably be pretty dry. Pure grain alcohol should dehydrate it completely. But you go ahead and let it drip out. Then take the herb that you normally would throw away because you've made a tincture, but now take the herb and put it in some water and boil it in the water for a while. Make a tea, okay? And then boil that tea down till it's the same amount as the tincture you just squeezed out. And so now you have an equal amount of the tincture with pure grain alcohol, 95%, and you have an equal amount of tea that you've made. You can go ahead and boil the tea for 20 minutes or so and then simmer it down. And then go ahead and add these two together. The tea has all the water-soluble ingredients and the alcohol has all the alcohol-soluble ingredients. And this two-step process will give you a tincture that has both fractions. And you should end up with about 45% alcohol, is it? Yeah, 45% more or less, 47.5% alcohol in the end with the pure grain 95 and the water. And this is what I like to do with the Usnea. This next plant we're going to look at is a small weedy plant. And if we look at this one here, at first glance you would say, oh, it's a dandelion. And well, it sure looks like one. But you know, there's a lot of plants that look like dandelions. It's in the Compositae or Asteraceae family. And there are so many plants that look like dandelions, and they can be so hard to tell apart that botanists call this type of plant a DYC, or damn yellow composite, because they often so look alike. But we're in a disturbed area, and we're looking at it, and at first glance you might think it was a dandelion. This is a common weed around here that grows in lawns. It also forms the dandelion-like fuzz that flies away in the wind. But if we go ahead and take a look at this plant and follow the stem down to the leaves, and that will help us figure out what this is. Because if we look at the leaves here, notice that the edges of the leaves are rounded. They're not pointed. And that lets us know that this is not a dandelion, because dandelions are going to have sharp points. They're going to have sharp points rather than rounded lobing. Now, this plant, just like a dandelion, has very irregular leaves. The leaves will be different shapes depending on which leaf you get. But notice all of them are rounded at the tip, rather than a sharp point of the dandelion. Diente de leon, the teeth of the lion. They have sharp teeth. This actually isn't Taraxacum officinalis. This is This is the Hypochaeris radicata, which I call the fake dandelion, and some people call cat's ears. This is not dandelion. And it grows in the same places as dandelion. It grows after the dandelions are gone, totally gone. But you can eat it just the same. Not all DYCs, not everything that looks like a dandelion is edible. Some of them are poisonous. But this particular plant you can eat. And it's got a root very similar to dandelion. And everyone pretty much agrees that you could eat the leaves and the roots just like dandelion. But for many years, people would tell me that you could not use the roots like dandelion medicinally. It isn't really dandelion. But, you know, I looked at the tinctures that I made from it, and I looked at the tea I made from it, and you could see, just like dandelion, that it had a milky layer in it. And when you taste it, you can taste the nutrition that's in it. It's very nutritive. So as the years have changed, as the years have gone by and people have started working more with this plant, it isn't a direct replacement for dandelion. Dandelion is definitely much stronger, but you can still see that it contains some polysaccharides in there that has some value. It contains the same type of nutrition that dandelion would. And although I don't consider it a direct replacement, I still think it would be useful for many of the things that dandelion is dandelion's used for. And I think that's another change in herbalism over the years that I found very interesting. When I first started working with herbalism, people would say you could use red clover. And all the other clovers that were wild, well, you could eat those, but you couldn't use them as medicine. They weren't the same as the red clover. But as the years have come by, many local herbalists have used their native clovers, trifoliums, and found them to be quite useful. So I think that one of the changes that I've seen over the years is the fact that there's more of the local use of plants and replacement or analog plants than just the specific European plants that we were introduced to years ago. And I think this is good. Some of our native plants, some of our bioregional plants are weaker than their European counterparts, and some are stronger. But I'm very glad to see our local plants being used. And I hope that you make the conscious effort to learn and use your local plants and your local analogs, rather than having a tendency to think that for some reason that you might need that one plant that comes from far away. We probably have a local substitute from it.